Thank you for the opportunity to present today's webinar entitled Making B'nai Mitzvah Meaningful for All Students. I am Dory Fruman-Kirshner, and I am the Executive Director of Matan, an organization dedicated to enabling the Jewish community to include all kinds of learners in all Jewish educational settings. I am of the belief that you don't have to have a master's in special ed in order to do inclusion well. Don't get me wrong, you must have people on your team who are well trained. What I'm trying to say is that I believe that much of what is required for inclusion is an open heart, an open mind, and a willingness to be a partner with parents. You may not have all the answers, but you have to be committed to being part of the solution in getting to the answers. I frequently say that 85% of what we do as a Jewish community vis-a-vis inclusion can be summed up with one word: attitude. I want to throw out one last opinion, and that is that though you are most likely viewing this webinar because you'd like to know more about inclusion or do better vis-a-vis students who may face learning challenges, all of what is contained here today can be applied to all students. Meredith Polsky, Matan's founder and current Director of Training and Advocacy, likes to say, special education is just really good education. So with those points in mind, let's dive in. A few quick statistics about what we're talking about when we talk about special needs in the Jewish community. National research suggests that at least 15 to 20% of all students struggle with some sort of learning issue. National data collected in the Jewish community reflects that there are approximately 1 million school-age children. And if we extrapolate from both of these statistics, it's a pretty safe bet, and we can assume that somewhere between 150 to 200,000 Jewish children currently struggle with some sort of learning issue that are of school age. Now, we know that not all children receive a formal Jewish education, but of those who do, it is estimated that almost 85% of them do so in an afternoon or Sunday school setting. And that is where most of you come in, I would imagine. We have thousands of years worth of wisdom in our tradition that points to the notion of al-pi darko, that we must educate each child according to the way that he or she learns best. In other words, it's incumbent upon the teacher to plan the content around the child and his or her learning style. For the purpose of this webinar, please try to picture in your mind's eye a large bullseye or target. And right before you make those concentric circles, imagine that in the very center, the face of one particular student is on that sheet of paper. Put that face in the center. Now draw the rings of the target around that person. I think in education, too often we attempt to do the opposite. We try to figure out how we're going to fit a student into our idea of what the bar bat mitzvah process should look like. I'm suggesting we flip the order. Start with the child and then draw the goals, methodology, service, etc., according to what is going to work for him or her. After all, we know that someone achieves bar bat mitzvah literally by having a birthday. Nothing else is actually required. So let us structure learning and the expression of that learning as a reflection of the individual's strengths, abilities, and interests. In other words, al-pi darko. Throughout the webinar, for simplicity's sake, I will refer to 3 types of learners. There are obviously many types of learners, and no one person learns best in only one way. However, the 3 main ones that we will focus on are visual learners, those who learn best by seeing information presented; auditory learners, those who learn best by listening and or speaking. These people thrive in discussion-based activities. And kinesthetic or tactile learners, those who learn best by touching, doing, and experiencing information. The picture is adorable, but it is clearly a rhetorical question. Hopefully, we are now all on the same page and in agreement that one size does not fit all. Everyone learns differently, and again, it is up to us to figure out what is going to work for each student. We are all unique. No 2 minds think alike, and we each benefit from being taught in such a way that embraces our needs. This is known as differentiated instruction. The next part of this webinar is an attempt to demystify the idea of differentiated instruction and translate it, meaning that we all can focus on the learner and educating him or her according to his or her way. Remember the picture of the child in the center of a blank sheet of paper? Then draw the bullseye. A quick thought from an expert in differentiated instruction. Often, children are required to adapt to instructional material, teaching practices, environment, and assessments. Many of these children who are unable to adapt are often viewed as being deficient in their ability to learn. So what is differentiated instruction? How can I tell you about making that term seem less daunting? A more clinical definition is a flexible approach to teaching in which the teacher plans and carries out varied approaches to content, meaning what is covered, process, how it is covered, and product, how we measure the results of the learning, usually the expression of what is learned, in anticipation of and in response to student differences in readiness, interests, and learning needs. So differentiated instruction is different styles of content, process, and product. It is respectful of all learners. It is proactive. You can use it in the form of a whole class activity, a small group activity, or an individual instruction. It is always focused on the student's best interest. And remember that it's always about us as educators, changing up our teaching rather than expecting students with various learning styles to just get that which we're trying to convey. You want a simpler definition? At its most basic level, differentiating instruction means shaking things up, what goes on in the classroom, so that students have multiple options for taking in information, making sense of ideas, and expressing what they learn. I have a feeling that many of you already do this naturally. However, it's good to keep in mind the 3 different kinds of learners that we spoke about in slide number 4 when planning anything. For example, if it's your job to give out instructions at a retreat weekend, have you thought about the need to not only verbally give those instructions, but also plan to hand out a sheet with the steps to be followed? Have you considered buddying up people so that if someone doesn't remember all the directions, they can rely on a friend for help? Have you ever considered making up a quick song with hand motions about the various steps that you're asking people to follow, so that those who can't process sequential information visually or auditorily are using their bodies to literally act out what steps need to be taken? Think about how you would prefer as a learner to be told how to do something in a multi-step process. Would you want to write it down? Would you want to be pacing as you're taking in the information auditorily? Would you be bouncing your leg up and down the whole time as you take in the information? Would you quickly make up a tune in your head so that you wouldn't forget it, or a mnemonic device? Think about all those modalities as much as you can whenever planning anything. So now to the crux of the webinar. As you can probably assume, I'm with you today to emphasize the point that B'nai Mitzvah celebrations, preparations, and services do not all have to look the same. This has to, of course, be an acceptable way of doing things at your congregation. Make sure all stakeholders buy into this differentiated idea. If they don't, let us know. We at Matan have suggestions for how to build consensus, but that's another webinar altogether. So we'll start with the idea of adapting the content, multiple options for delivering the information to students, providing various resources to meet student learning needs on their level, such as large print or utilizing transliteration, using multimedia technology, integrating that into their B'nai Mitzvah study. Another way to adapt according to according to a student's needs, is adapting the process, how you do what you do. You could use flexible grouping, pair B'nai Mitzvah students in groups that complement one another. You could modify the physical environment. Where does the student learn best? You could permit or be more permissible about movement during the B'nai Mitzvah preparation, and consider multimodal activities. Like we talked about before, not everybody's going to learn the same kind of way. As an example, you could give students the opportunity to experience learning in at least 3 different modalities using an iPad or a computer. At Matan, we have worked with countless educators in creating lessons and even whole services based on the use of this technology. You can visualize the Hebrew, you have an iconic picture, you can focus on the transliteration, and with the push of a button, which is using your tactile kinesthetic sense, you could actually hear the Shema, and so on. Finally, adapting the product. Multiple options for students to express what they know. You could have a Friday night service, a Shabbat morning service, a Havdalah service, a weekday service. You could encourage students and families to choose what makes the most sense for their needs. So what do you have to do? How do you put this into practice today? You start by getting to know your B'nai Mitzvah students. Remember, success is incumbent upon us, our partnership with parents, our drawing the target around the student, and of course, our attitude. About the B'nai Mitzvah meetings. Most of you probably already do what I'm about to say in some way, shape, or form. We at Matan are just trying to give you a few more tools for your toolbox. Meet with each family, include the B'nai Mitzvah student, and talk about your vision, ideals, and goals for a B'nai Mitzvah and the various ways that it can be done. Some important questions to ask. When will the B'nai Mitzvah be? What are the B'nai Mitzvah students' goals? Who will be coordinating and guiding the B'nai Mitzvah process? How will the students prepare for the B'nai Mitzvah? Where will the B'nai Mitzvah take place? Which service is the right fit for the B'nai Mitzvah student? And why is becoming a B'nai Mitzvah important? Many of you are probably familiar with the notion that in special education, it is common to devise an IEP, an individualized education plan. At Matan, we have developed one for religious school settings known as the IREP, the Individualized Religious Education Plan. It's a written plan that describes the student's goals. It's created with the student's needs in mind. It defines the student's goals, which may be different from their peers, and it puts supports in place and allows the student to not only attend religious school education, but be successful there as well. Who writes this IREP? Well, here are some suggestions. Parents, clergy, the student, educators, and beyond. A great tool to utilize in the first meeting would be vision and goal setting. A combination of the following: the parents' Jewish educational goals for their child, the students' Jewish educational goals if appropriate, the religious school educational goals or the congregational goals. You must start somewhere in terms of prioritizing. Together with the student and the family, create a list of B'nai Mitzvah S.M.A.R.T goals, and I will go into that in the next slide. Choose 3 attainable goals for the child to begin working on. You must continually assess the progress, and every 2 to 3 months check back in on the progress to ensure that the student is staying on track with their goals. Once he or she is proficient with those original goals, then it's time to move on to other goals on the list. So what is a S.M.A.R.T goal? S.M.A.R.T goals originated with George Doran in 1981, and they're now used by people all over the world. They are, it's an acronym, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant and realistic, and time-bound. Here is a couple of examples of real students for whom our IEPs were developed, especially vis-a-vis B'nai Mitzvah preparation. Please feel free to be in touch with us at Matan about instances in which you have thought out of the box, effectively drawing the target around the child. And if you need a sounding board as you're in the midst of figuring something out, by all means, please feel free to be in touch. The first example, a student who had something called Prader-Willi syndrome, who has an obsession with food, eating, uncontrollable cravings. We decided to advise the congregation to use food in the process of the B'nai Mitzvah training and focus some of the learning on food banks. Her service, which ended up not being held at a congregation, had a hands-on component where everyone in attendance made sandwiches, food bags, etc. for a local food bank. A second example, a student with a learning disability and extreme fear of large crowds was very interested in being outside in nature and in technology. His family planned on an outside service for the family and close friends. And because he didn't love speaking in front of groups of people, he ended up using a PowerPoint presentation that demonstrated what his bar mitzvah meant to him. He also led parts of the service. The professor who inspired me to delve deeper into issues of inclusion when I did my graduate school work was Professor Howard Gardner. His theory of multiple intelligences is something I feel all human beings need to know. He says, the biggest mistake in teaching has been to treat all children as if they are variants of the same individual, and thus to feel justified in teaching them all the same subjects in the same way. So to sum it up, student success is dependent on team effort, communication, honesty, differentiation, and parental involvement. And I would add our attitude. Ask yourself, do all my B'nai Mitzvah students have access to the tools, knowledge, and guidance that they need in order to have a successful and meaningful B'nai Mitzvah experience? Where would you place the program you run for B'nai Mitzvah students on the continuum of differentiated instruction? What can you be doing better? Remember, no two students are alike. Thank you very much, and please feel free to be in touch.